it's Tracy with Sustain, where we believe that if teachers are supported, engaged, and equipped, then every learner succeeds in our classrooms. So today I'm going to show you how I set up interactive notebooks that work and stay organized, which is chef's kiss, right? All right, so just a quick recap. My journey to interactive notebooks took about 5 years before I got to this place right here that I'm going to share with you guys. But I want to be able to take you from having an interactive notebook that is functional but difficult to maintain to one that is going to be functional, easy to maintain, stays organized, and is easy for your students to keep up with. So let's get started. The first thing that you guys are going to need is to gather your supplies for today. We need to start with a composition notebook. So you can either pass these out to students or you can ask them to bring in a comp book on your supply list. I usually got comp books donated to me through Donors Choose or Amazon Wishlist. I know I was very fortunate to have a lot of people support me and my students in the classroom. So comp book, most important. And then the supplies that you're going to need to supplement that. Glue. I personally preferred liquid glue because it holds up a lot better than glue sticks. But if you're a glue stick kind of gal or guy, you go with those. You are also going to need some colored pencils or washable markers. What you don't want to use are Sharpies and flare pins on the inside of your notebooks because they're going to bleed through the pages and it just makes the process a little bit more difficult. So try to avoid those if possible. You're also going to need a roll of duct tape. I usually supplied 1 roll per group. I also color coded my notebooks, which I'll talk about in just a second. So for example, if first hour's color is red, then all of the interactive notebooks in first hour are going to end up being color-coded red here on the spine, which I'm going to walk you guys through. Optional is going to be some scissors for today's setup. If you can tear duct tape easily, then you're not going to need the scissors. Sharpie to write on the outside of our composition notebook. And then another option today is going to be a highlighter, which I'll show you how you can utilize this, or you can use colored cardstock paper. All right, so let's get into it. The first thing that you want to do on the composition notebooks is have all your students write their names. Very simple, I know, but first and last name on the top line. And then below that, you're going to want them to write the year. So if I'm making it for this school year, 2025 to 2026. And then also if you teach multiple classes or you have several different hours of the same class, you want to document that as well. So whether or not they're in your first time block or first hour or first period class, however your school likes to delineate that. Or if you teach both math and science, you want to make sure that they're writing math or science on there. Something else that I've seen a lot of teachers use recently is thermal laminating or printing sheets where they print out a sticker and just slap it on the front of the comp book. That's also an option, but we're going cost effective here. So very first thing is that basic information. After that, when we're setting up the composition notebook, there's a few things that we want to do. So like I said earlier, color coding. So I gave my students the roll of duct tape at their groups, and I trusted them to be able to handle this process. As a former science teacher, we did a lot of measurements using our body as exemplars. So when it comes to our duct tape, we are going to use approximately 3 inches. So if you fold your hand like this part right here is approximately 1 inch. So I have them measure it out with their finger knuckles. So I would say 3 finger knuckles. So 1, 2, 3, that's where I'm going to have them cut. Okay, so now we have a strip of strip of duct tape that's not too long and isn't getting out of control. So when it comes to taping it on the spine, and this is where we're going to put it for color coding purposes for different class hours, you could also, if you're real fancy, You could get colored comp books, all one color for one class, but this is easy peasy, especially in my district where I taught, because we had a transient military-based population. And so we had a lot of students coming and going. Some would leave and then come back later in the year, or they would switch hours. So using duct tape is a really simple solution to quickly just put them in the different hour bin that they may be coming and going from. Okay, so when it comes to taping this, if you just let kids tape it, they're going to put it in many different places, and a lot of times it's going to be up on here too far, which is going to give you a really sticky situation that's going to gum up the rest of these pages and make them hard to work with. So going back to our body parts, I tell them a finger length down. Okay, so here's a finger, line it up with the top. Then you're going to take your duct tape, and most comp books have this nice spine on the end. So just starting on the back or the front, you're going to line it up with that. And then we're just going to wrap it around. Okay, so now we have about a finger width at the top. We've wrapped it around here. And now what we're going to do on the spine is we are going to write either the class or the student's name, however it is that's going to be best for you to organize it in your classroom. For this demonstration, I'm going to write Hoover, which is my last name. And I'm going to put TB1, which for my school right now stands for Time Block 1. Okay, so name, time block. Now it's easy to find my comp book if it's in a bin, if I'm sorting through. I have the front information, but I've also got it here on the spine. Okay, so that's just an organizational tip. The next thing that we're going to do is start setting up the inside of our composition notebook. The first thing that I always suggest when people are doing this is to make a pocket, because as you're doing interactive notebooks, a lot of times you're cutting and pasting and small pieces get lost very easily, especially if you have a student who's a little bit slower paced. And so this is going to create a location for them to keep small pieces like that, or also folded pieces of paper that you're still working on that you want them to glue in at a later time. So this is how we're going to do it. Take this top corner of the very first page, okay, and fold it down to make a nice triangle, and then crease that edge. Okay, so we're just folding that very top piece like so. Okay, and now we're going to bring it over, and we are going to attach it to the front cover, this cardboard front cover. If you have poly comp books, so the ones that have plastic, you're probably going to want to utilize either packing tape or maybe some strips of that duct tape again, because glue is not going to work fantastic. If you have the time and the energy, you can also hot glue it for the students. But for this demo, we are just going to use regular old school glue. And I teach my students the dot, dot, dash method. So one small dot of glue followed by a dash, you end with a dot. That way they are not putting glue the entire length of the paper. And a lot of glue is not going to be seeping out the bottom or going up the top, which makes our pocket really shallow. So I had a dot, a dash, a dot, a dash right here. And again, this is something that I would demonstrate and do with my students during this process. I wouldn't just tell them you're going to do a dot dash and expect them to know what that looks like or understand it. So again, a dot of glue, a dash of glue, a dot of glue, a dash of glue. And this is on that cardboard piece. So as this is drying, this is going to be our pocket. We're going to fill out the About Me page. So I bet that you never have students who like to doodle over everything, which never personally bothered me, but I know some people, it can really get under your skin when you've spent all that time making that beautiful form for them and they've just scribbled all over it. So I use this page as kind of their landing zone when it comes to doodling. So if they finish early, like feel free to doodle on your About Me page. But more importantly, this lets me get to know the students as I'm walking around checking comp books, or if I'm flipping through them just to look for an organizational aspect, or maybe I'm doing a formative assessment using their comp books, whatever the case may be. This is just a nice place for this to land. So I always have my students, and this is where you want to use your colored pencils or those washable markers, but again, avoid Sharpies or flare pens for this part, or markers that aren't washable, because those also tend to bleed. So any color they want, there's write their name nice and big across the front page. Okay. I typically have them label the top of this all about me, just as a reminder of what it is. So I'm writing that at the top just in my colored pencil. And then I asked students to draw. I usually gave them 3 items on this page that represent them. Some students really hate drawing, and so if that's the case, they could just write words about them. A lot of times on my demo, which you can also see in this picture, I would do pumpkins because fall is my favorite time of the year. At the school I was at, we were the Rockets. Again, maple leaf, a little atom because I was a science teacher, and then a heart for family, just whatever is going to represent them. A lot of them put a lot of sport icons, whether it's a sport they play or a team that they follow. Again, it's just a really great way to get to know your students. So after that, right behind this doodle page, so here's our all about me on the back side of that. I always recommend going over composition notebook rules with students and then pasting those rules into their comp book on the very first page. So before we go anywhere else, we're going to be putting our rules in there, and it's really just a way to encourage you to have students utilize the composition notebook rules and make sure we're following along here. Okay, so on the back of the All About Me, these composition notebook rules are really great. You can print 2 to a page, and so these half sheets fit perfectly inside of comp books. So just remember that when you're creating like keys and notes and things like that, half pages are ideal for comp books. So for half pages like this, I usually don't do a dot dot dash. I just do dots in the 4 corners, and then they can do one in the middle to connect. So 4 corner dots. And then using our finger measurements again, I typically tell them to leave a finger width between your dot and the edge of the page, so that when you're smoothing it down, you don't have glue bleeding out, which is going to cause all of your pages to stick together. So after we have our dots, I also, pro tip, have my students align any of the documents that we are putting in with the top blue line of the comp book. So this top line right here is where I tell students to start gluing, and inside of this red line. Okay, so this part stays blank. That way we can write additional information in the margins if we need it, but aligning with the top, and this works really well with college ruled notebooks. For wide ruled notebooks, having them line their papers to the bottom blue line works better, because a lot of times the top, you don't have enough space going all the way to the bottom. So college rule from the top, wide ruled from the bottom. Okay, so that is going to be your composition notebook rules, or your contract. In some science classes, you have to have a safety contract. That can be a location for that to go. But this was just an example of the rules that I had for comp books with students, which really just reinforce that they're responsible for this. If anything happens to it, we have some solutions. We can start over from wherever they left off. I always keep a demo composition notebook for every single hour. So as I'm setting this up with you, if I was in my classroom, I would be setting it up with my students, utilizing what I always had was a document camera. But now I know that there's other technologies available for that. But any way that you can display what you are doing for your students is going to be ideal in terms of them being able to replicate what you're wanting. So definitely use the I write, you write method. So I glue, you glue. I fold, you fold. Okay, so demonstrating and modeling is going to be really helpful when going through interactive notebooks all the time. So it seems very strenuous to do this, but it's also really good for pacing purposes. So if you're doing an activity and you're doing it with your students, typically if you are solo testing out an activity before your students interact with it, which if you're not doing, I would highly encourage you to do that. Just kind of the golden rule in secondary anyway is that you take whatever you did and you're going to add 5 to 7 minutes onto that. And that is going to equate about the average time it's going to take students to do the same activity that you just did. However, when you're doing your interactive notebooks, if you're doing it with students, it's a lot easier to get that lay of the land. So as you're talking and doing this, students are replicating that, and that allows you to not only demonstrate exactly what you want it to look like, but then also have, some spatial awareness, some time management incorporated into that as well. All right, so after the composition notebook rules, now we can move forward. And we're going to talk about the tab. So this tab really, truly changed the way that I did interactive notebooks. I was not the original creator of the tab. One of my PLC partners introduced it to me, but what I did do is I took the idea and I made it work best for my students. And what I found out is anytime I shared this with someone else, it just kept evolving and getting better and better. So I wish that this is what it looked like when I was in the classroom, but it unfortunately was not. I still had like a cutesy picture right here to go with the unit. But something that I did do that I am definitely demonstrating for you guys now and highly encourage you is if you have a table of contents at the front of your interactive notebooks, stop. Stop doing it. Because I feel like, and at least in my own personal opinion, that is what made this such a tedious task for me and my students, was keeping up with all of that minute information, where we were spending more time doing that and checking our table of contents and matching it with page numbers than actually just getting the content in the book for the students to interact with, which is the whole point of it, right? With these particular tabs in our notebooks, there is a special method of getting there. So first of all, I just want to go on the front side of it. You're going to give your unit a title, but then underneath, we know within our units, we have priority standards that we're wanting our students to really hone in on. Those are the standards that we are guaranteeing we are going to work towards mastery on. Not saying our other standards are not important or they don't hold value in our unit and instructional spaces, but there are particular ones that we really put extra emphasis on. So those are the ones that are going to go on this front tab of your unit marker. And you'll notice on here, I gave a space for you to record your students' personal reflection on their progress towards mastery. So there's a space to add in a proficiency scale. Now, these proficiency scales are specific to the standard. They are not your general number 1, I don't have it, number 4, like Eureka, I can teach someone else, which, by the way, is something that I had as my baseline standard in my classroom. I'm so sorry to my former students. Super cheesy. However, I've grown up, gotten better. So these need to be specific to the standards that you are teaching, and it has a place for a beginning rating and an end rating. And this is on that 1 through 4 scale, and they can match what does a 1 actually mean, what does a 4 actually mean when it comes to this particular content. Okay, the other side, table of contents, that's a little bit easier to understand. The big change with using these tabs, though, is that every single time you change the unit, your table of contents page number starts on 1. So you no longer have to say, I need you guys to turn to page 53 because my 53 is inevitably a different 53 than what they have. But if I say we are looking at unit 1, I need you to turn to this lesson that should be around page 5. That's going to be a lot easier for them to navigate. than them rustling through all the pages and trying to figure out which activity you're directing them to. So every time we put in a new unit marker, which is this, we start our table of contents back over on 1. Okay, so you really have to walk students through how to set this up the first couple of times, and then they're going to master it. This example that I'm going to show you is just on blank copy paper. Another really good pro tip is to print these off on colored cardstock, because then the tabs are a lot more durable and they withstand just the daily use of the interactive notebook. But plain paper, perfectly fine. So in between this part right here where you have the name of your unit is where you're going to fold the paper. It does not fold perfectly in half. So when you tell students to fold this, make sure you specify that this is not a perfect fold, okay? The line is straight, but it's not going to go corner to corner. There's going to be some overlap there, and that is intentional. So in between the unit tabs, you want to go ahead and make that into a nice crease so that you have this side where the unit tab is, and then on the back is a table of contents, which is this side. Okay, so when you put this into the comp book, you also need to walk them through this step by step because it can get a little bit dicey. I'm going to try my best to demonstrate like this while I'm talking you through. Okay, so the tab, you're only gluing down a part of it because this tab becomes a holder for the entire unit. So this space right here where it has the unit mark, that's supposed to hang out of your comp book. So what I always had my students do is line up the paper, again to that top blue line, and then the edge of their comp book is going to be on this first solid line. Okay, so they're just gluing this section into the comp book. The rest of this stays out. So for that, again with the dot method, so 4 dots, but making sure that they're going in enough. So for the tab clearance, you want to use 2 finger widths to make sure that you're not putting glue on that tab itself. So what I mean by that, on the gluing method, I don't know if you can see these dots that well, but there's a space here. But then when I get to the tab part, which is here, there's going to be 2 finger widths before I get to that glue dot. So I'm going to line this up in my comp book to the very top blue line. And I'm going to make sure my bold line is at the end. Okay, so I lined it up with the very top here, and the edge of the comp book is on this line. So this next part is where you can have the optional highlighter or colored marker. And what I would have students do if I was out of my colored cardstock is I would have them use a color code. So for this one, I would say this is unit 1. We're all going to use yellow. So whether that's a yellow marker or a yellow highlighter, I would not use a colored pencil for this one. But what we're going to do is we're just going to shade in or color just the tab parts that are sticking out of our comp book. So we are not highlighting the entire piece of paper, which some students would love to do. If you've ever introduced annotations to middle school students, the first couple of times you're like, whoo, Nellie, slow down with that marker there. Okay, so just highlighting the tab parts that has the name of the unit in that way, that can help some of our other students who struggle with literacy or who just need some extra support. So now when we're talking about a specific unit, you can direct them to our yellow unit. Or if you're able to use the colored paper, we're going to look back at our pink unit or our green unit. So that's just another way to help support students by having those in there. All right, so we have this glued in now. And the whole point, the beauty of this tab is that you can start to contain your entire unit within this flap. So anytime we have pages that we are adding different foldables to, we are going to just write it here in our table of contents, and then those pages get tucked inside of the unit. So let me show you an example using another comp book that we use for the summer. So we have, again, here's our pocket. This one we did use flare pens on, and as you can see on the back of it, a little bit on the sides where it's not covered up by these comp book rules, they do bleed through pretty significantly. Okay, so here's an example of one of those unit tabs. And if I open up that tab, here is where I have all this unit information. So here's an example of a BAV, a Frayer model. I have a template for you guys to be able to utilize. So giving students the template and then having them just draw these out. I also taught students how to just use the entire page as a Frayer model. And I am pulling up an example to show you. Like this. So just turning it to the side and drawing the 4 boxes, and then you have a Frayer model. And then you start to put in your interactive notebook pieces. So foldables, big hits. And the thing I love most about foldables is that you can use these in so many different ways and formats, which is why on the samples that I have to provide for everybody, if you comment down below for the link, I will send you all of these. However, I don't have instructions on them, and that's intentional because I want you to utilize them however you need them to be. So for these are math examples, multi-step equations. Here is solution, no solution, infinite solutions, and then underneath is an example of what that looks like. Okay, you can also have other foldables like this. These are ELA examples. So plot, and then here is a definition underneath this flower petal one. There's also this one where you can fold it out. You can also fold this one the other way, and it can pop up into a pyramid and then fold flat again. Also, you don't have to have foldables. I feel like that was something that took a while for me to really wrap my mind around, which is so silly to say out loud, but I felt like an interactive notebook had to be an activity for every single thing, and it doesn't. You can just have good old-fashioned notes in here. You can also have notes that are on just a worksheet where students are doing like closed reading and filling in the blanks. You can fold that in half and just glue down one side inside of the comp book. Let me find an example of that to show you. So that their notes are still in here, but it's okay if they're a full sheet instead of a half sheet. So still fits, still applicable, all the good stuff. Okay, so I just showed you several examples. Now let's say that was the end of our first unit. So we have pages 1 through 7 here. So now I take this and I fold it over. So now the entire unit is contained in this one tab. And now I can start putting in my tab for our next unit and carry on. So you want to make sure that as you add things into your interactive notebook that you are keeping up with the table of contents. But again, we start over on page 1 for every unit. Okay, so no longer is it this going to be like ending on page 7, so now this has to be page 8. No, this is now page 1 of unit 2 or page 1 of our green unit, however you want to delineate that for your students. So again, it just makes everything organized. It makes it a lot easier to conceptualize for our students. It helps them stay organized because they're not keeping up with those little tiny details again, like I'm on page 123, but what I have on page 123 is not what my teacher has. So now I've tuned out because I feel lost. So that really does alleviate a lot of that difficulty because you direct them to that specific unit. Also, when they're reviewing the material, it is so much easier for them to be able to go to a particular place and time throughout the school year to look for that information versus when it's just in the book like this and now they're having to thumb through it, because let's be honest, the majority of them are not going to go to the table of contents because they haven't kept up with it the way that you want them to anyway. So just having it quick and accessible, organized, streamlined, I promise you, it is going to make it so much more sustainable for you, and it's going to make the process enjoyable again. I really wanted to give up on doing interactive notebooks, but I kept hearing like they're best for students, and I'm all about that. So I kept trying and trying, and until I came across this solution that really worked for me. They were so difficult, and then they became so easy. And at the end of the year, when I let my students take them home, in the past, the trash cans were overflowing with them. The kids were like, I'm never going to use this again. They would toss it. By the last year I was in the classroom before I moved into an instructional coach position, my students were actually taking them home. They weren't in my trash can. They weren't in the big dumpster in the hall as they cleaned out lockers at the end of the year. It was beautiful, and it gave me that peace of mind that this is something that's right, not only for me, but for them. It truly was a win-win. So the rest of this is just some tips and tricks. Here are some types of the foldables that we can provide for you, again, for free. You just have to ask for it. And then some other quick tips and tricks. Storage solutions for your classroom. When you're doing foldables, a lot of times teachers complain, maybe not complain, but talk about how you need supplies for them. So have group bins for your students where you only put the supplies they need for that day in the bin. And that way it's quick and accessible. The Dollar Tree has great buckets for these. The dollar section at Target also has these for pretty cheap. So if something, breaks or it gets gross or gunky, it's not a huge painful loss to you. It's okay to replace them. Another thing that I would do is anytime we had cut and paste stuff, I would get a bin that was just like an empty bucket from the Dollar Tree, essentially. And that became our group trash bin. So all of your paper scraps go in there. And at the end of the day, one person from each group would dump it out into our big trash can. So very small solutions like that made a huge impact with just time, because time is that one thing that we all need more of in the classroom that we don't have. So finding ways to make this work for you. Again, practice this with your students. You have to keep up with it. The more you keep up with it, the more you and them are going to utilize it the way that it's meant to work for you. And you're going to see a lot of success. And I cannot wait to see how you guys are doing with this. Please, please, please let me know if there's any questions. Feel free to reach out to us. Again, we are Sustained. Go to our website, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. If you comment below resources, I'll send you a link to what I have. Thank you guys so much for coming along this journey. I can't wait to hear how this works out for you. I wish you the best of luck for this school year.